Okay, hello everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here. So welcome to our educational webinar on how to submit measures for the fall 2023 cycle. I'm Brenna Rabel, the Battelle Technical Director for our Partnership for Quality Measurement consensus-based work. I'm joined today by my colleague, Matt Pickering, who leads up the endorsement and maintenance piece of this work. Before we begin today, I would like to just thank you all for joining and encourage anyone who's not already a PQM member to visit our website and sign up so that you can stay up to date on PQM activities and receive announcements for webinars like this one. Next slide, please. So the purpose of today's call is really to familiarize you all with the endorsement and maintenance intent to submit, or ITS, process, and the full measure submission process and timelines. So given the timing of today's presentation, we are going to be focusing specifically on the deadlines and milestones for the fall 2023 cycle. We're going to begin with an overview of our PQM submission tool and repository, also known as STAR, along with a detailed timeline for its launch. We'll talk you through the fall 2023 timeline and measure submission expectations before pausing for a quick Q&A. As a reminder, all of the lines are muted throughout the call, so you're going to need to put your questions into the Q&A feature in Zoom if you want us to ask them out loud at the end of the meeting and go through the responses. And before we adjourn for the day, we're also going to just discuss a handful of upcoming engagement opportunities that I hope will be of interest to all of you. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So as I said, I'm going to walk through a brief description of what the submission tool and repository actually is, and then I'll go through the timeline, and then I'm going to turn the reins over to Matt to walk you through the actual intent to submit page and the submission fields later on in the presentation. So let's just go ahead to the next slide. So as its name suggests, STAR is both a measure submission tool and a database of measures that are submitted to us for endorsement and maintenance, or E&M review. Our team updates this database regularly as measures are submitted for review. And on top of that, we also have a long list of planned enhancements that we'll be rolling out over the coming months to optimize the database's usability, accuracy, and accessibility. But in the meantime, the tool is publicly accessible via the PQM website at the URL that's linked here, and we can put that in the chat as well. And in that database, you'll find current and historical measure information about any measures that have been submitted to a consensus-based entity for endorsement or maintenance review. So that's any measures submitted to the PQM CBE, and also measures that were submitted earlier to NQF. Those should be in there as well. Now, the submission tool component of STAR is what allows measure developers and stewards to submit their measures for endorsement and maintenance. So to do that, you will need to follow the steps that are listed here. And again, Matt's going to walk you through those. But most importantly, you're going to need to create an account with us. It is free. And then you're going to need to navigate to the endorsement and maintenance webpage to submit the measure. Your first step, as it always has been historically, is going to be to complete the intent to submit form to indicate to Battelle that you'll be submitting a measure for review in an upcoming cycle. And then following that intent to submit deadline, you'll receive an approval email from Battelle staff that indicates that you can proceed to the full measure submission process. Again, Matt's going to walk you through that in a few short minutes here. Next slide, please. Okay, again, before I turn it over, let's just walk through some important dates as we approach the fall 2023 ITS deadlines. So let's go to the next slide. So those of you who were able to attend our guidebook presentation earlier in the summer will probably recognize this slide, which really just shows the 6 major steps that make up our E&M process. Today, we're really focusing on steps 1 and 2, so intent to submit and full measure submission phases. But for context, I'll tell you that, following your measure submission, your measure or measures will undergo staff review, concurrent with a public comment period. If staff have any clarifying questions about your measure, they'll reach out via email during that time frame. Once our staff have completed their assessments of the measure, they're going to basically provide a summary of their assessments along with the measure information that you submitted to the E&M committee members to review independently. The committee members are going to then review those materials, provide some initial comments on the measures in writing to Battelle, and then we're going to compile those independent ratings in preparation for the committee meetings where the committee members are going to vote on each measure. And unlike in previous years, the committee's endorsement decisions will be considered final pending any necessary appeals. So there won't be any re-adjudication via the CSAC as there had been in the past. Next slide. Okay, so since the intent to submit is coming up on October 1st, it's important to know that this is where you can provide all of the key information about your measure to Battelle. So the fields are very straightforward. We're mostly looking for information about measure numerator and denominator, exclusions, data sources, among other things, really to help our team predict the number of measures that we're going to review this cycle, as well as to help us begin sorting them into the correct committees so that we can plan ahead. You're going to be able to submit the measures via the PQM website, and you'll find guidance about this step of the process on the E&M webpage, as well as in our very comprehensive and recently updated E&M guidebook, which is also online. One important note here is that if you ever find that the ITS deadline falls on a weekend or a holiday, the actual deadline is going to shift to the next business day. So that information is also in the E&M guidebook for reference, but just something that we want folks to be aware of. Next slide, please. So a month after the ITS deadline is when full measure submissions are due. So in the fall cycle, that means November 1st. Same as for ITS, if that date were to fall on a weekend or a holiday, the deadline would then shift to the following business day. For this cycle, you're going to be submitting your measures again via the PQM website. And again, Matt's going to walk you through how to do that. And then you can always visit the E&M webpage or review the recently updated E&M guidebook for information on this part of the process. Next slide. So here we're showing sort of very simply what happens across the 6-month endorsement and maintenance cycle. The dark blue and orange dots are really where we're going to be focusing today. So at that point is where we're going to, so when we get to the teal dot, is where we're going to conduct our initial completeness review, and that's where we'll reach out to developers with any questions about their submissions, any fields that look a little wonky. And then concurrent with public comment, our internal measure scientists and methodologists are going to be conducting more thorough preliminary assessments of the measures to help guide the committee reviews of each one. Those assessments, as I said, are going to be shared with the committee members at least about 3 weeks ahead of their recommendation group meetings to allow them sufficient time to review and rate each measure independently. Our team is then going to take those individual ratings and use them to develop meeting materials that focus mainly on the areas of greatest disagreement. We're also going to share with developers any questions raised by the committee members about the measures, mostly to help you prepare for your own materials and remarks for the meeting so that you can kind of anticipate, where the pain points might be. Then we'll hold the recommendation group meetings, collect the votes, and post the endorsement decisions to the PQM website. And as I mentioned earlier, these decisions will be considered final pending any necessary appeals reviews. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is where I turn things back to Matt to walk you through the ITS form and the measure submission tools. So thanks, everyone.
Great, thanks, Brenna. All right, so just keeping those deadlines in mind for the full measure submission, since the October 1st falls on a Sunday, it's going to be October 2nd. So you may have seen email communications around that. That's for intent to submit. And of course, the full measure submission for this cycle is still going to be on November 1st. So I'm going to walk you through this process of submitting those measures or intent to submit. Okay, so what you should be seeing now is the homepage for the PQM website. And when you go into submit a measure, whether it be intent to submit or full measure submission, you can access this through any particular browser that you're using. So when you're on this website, especially for the home page here, to navigate to submitting a measure, it's under this E&M tab. So E&M being endorsement and maintenance. So clicking on the tab, you'll see the drop-down menu where you have about, you kind of learn a little bit more about E&M plus the project information. So if you're trying to understand a little bit more details about the projects, especially some of the materials that are submitted for those projects, in relation to any upcoming meetings or any other information specifically for those projects, you can find them here. And you'll see a listing of active projects and also completed projects as well. But to submit a measure, it's this last item here. So when you click it, you're then just brought to the submit a measure page. You can see there's just some intro language here, plus a link to the endorsement and maintenance guidebook. Brenna had mentioned this will be a recently updated guidebook. For those of you that were on the call or the webinar on June 30th, we then posted the guidebook for public commenting for the month of July. We have been addressing those comments and making changes to the guidebook, which will be posted at the beginning of October. So there weren't a lot of substantial changes as far as what we expect to see related to the evaluation rubric itself and what we expect to have developers submit to us. But there are some more clarifications that we've provided in the guidebook related to E&M committee structure, subject matter expertise, and just some other potential clarifications in there as well. So this will be, this link will have the new guidebook posted the beginning of October in anticipation for the November 1st fall 2023 full measure submission. So you'll then also notice the fall 2023 timeline, the dates that Brenna had mentioned, what we discussed. The intent to submit portal is actually open now. So you can actually log in and submit your intent to submit, which we'll screen share here in a little bit, for the fall 2023 cycle. The deadline to get that into us is again October 2nd. Then the staff would review the intent to submit form. We just make sure things are looking good, nothing is missing, or there aren't any run-on sentences, for example. We just want to make sure it looks good, and then that will be approved for you to then submit your measure for the full measure submission. Now that will not open until the beginning of October. You can see October 2nd here. So meaning that if you go in and submit your intent to submit today, you will not be able to access the full measure submission, even if staff say that your intent to submit looks good, until the full measure submission portal is open. And again, that's going to open on October 2nd. The deadline to then submit the full measure to us will be November 1st. For new users, meaning anyone submitting a measure to Battelle for the first time. So this is even measure developers that have maintenance measures from the prior CDE, the National Quality Forum. Since you are now going to be submitting measures to Battelle for the first time, you need to complete a quality measures developer and steward agreement. So if you've submitted measures to the prior CBE in the past, they had a measure steward agreement as well. This is a very similar type of agreement in which that we have the rights to display detailed information, somewhat proprietary information for public comment. So we require that we have this form completed by the time we get into the measure evaluations. So the link to that form is located on this page. Instructions for completing that form are also located on this page, and subsequent measure submissions under the same steward. So you as a steward maybe have multiple measures. You wouldn't list them all on this first initial form. There's a secondary form when the time comes that you will then provide your additional measures for that will be appended to the QMDSA form. So you would submit that form to pqmsupport@battelle.org. And again, look at the instructions on how to actually complete it and submit it. Then the third step, again, this is for anyone newly submitting measures to Battelle. The third step after completing that form is then you want to be able to create an account. You want to create a PQM account. You will not be able to access the intent to submit forms or full measure submission forms without creating an account. Now, we highly encourage that all developers that would be associated, or all contacts that will be associated with the measure, including developer and steward contacts, create an account. But keep in mind that the individual who is submitting the intent to submit and also submitting the full measure submission will be the one that receives emails from Battelle as the process moves forward, right? So as a completeness review of the full measure submission is done by Battelle staff, an email will be sent out to the contact that was submitted that full measure submission form. Okay, so if you're thinking about who needs to be submitting this form, you want to try to find the person that will be able to then just coordinate and triage when those communications are delivered once the full measure submission form is reviewed. It's the same thing for when the next phase of our review, which is when staff do the preliminary assessments. That individual that submitted the form to begin with would be the one that gets that email communication. So keeping that in mind. So when you create an account, there is a video here, and we'll walk through this here in a little bit, but there is a video that you can also play that will also walk you through creating an account to submit measures for ITS and full measure submission. And just some additional instruction language down here when creating an account. So you must create an account, and you also will be sent a verification code for your first time creating the account. And this is just to verify that it's you. It'll come through your email, and then you'll enter that verification code into the form back on the Battelle website, and then complete the rest of the information. And you must have that verification code in order for the account to be set up. Once you've done creating your account, you can log in and you can go to create your a measure, or you can go to your My Account page, which we'll show here in a little bit, to then access your measure dashboard. And that will be where you can submit an intent to submit. You can check on the status from other measures, et cetera. So, and then lastly, in addition, as we've communicated a few weeks ago, we wanted to also provide you with the Word versions of the items or the questions that will be asked for both intent to submit and full measure submission, specifically for this fall 2023 cycle. So they are linked here on this page at the very bottom. You can see the intent to submit form here and the full measure submission form here as well. And again, these are Word versions, so that you can work in advance, work on those Word versions, and then be able to just copy paste the information into the relevant fields. Okay, so like I mentioned, you have to create an account. So to do that, you would then go to create a PQM account, and it takes you to this page where it's a sign-in page. Now, since this is the first time you're creating an account, you won't have an email or password set up. You'll have to sign up now. So when you click sign up now, it opens up this form where you would then enter in your information. I can spell Battelle correctly. You enter your information, you hit send verification code. There's another text box that pops up. You will then get a verification code sent to your email. It'll be delivered within a few minutes, and it will look like this. So it says, thank you. And again, it's not the email I entered, but this is just for tests. It'll say, thank you for creating an account, and here's the code that you'll want to enter into that field that popped up. So that's this field here. You enter that information in, and then you fill out the rest of the information by creating a password. Now, there are parameters to this password, so it has to be a minimum of 8 characters. You also have to include a capital letter as well as a lowercase letter, a number, or a symbol as well, like an exclamation point, a pound symbol. So keep in mind there is some parameters you'll have to populate in here. So a minimum of 8 characters with a capital letter, and you can either have a number or some sort of a symbol to create that. It will let you know if the password is not accepted. So then you would just finish out the rest of it. What name do you want to display? It could be your full name, it could be your first name. You as the user will be the only one to be able to see that from our end. I mean, the staff on our end can see that as well, but no one else from the public will be able to see that. Then you have your phone and your first name, last name, your job title. And you can see all the fields that are required here to be able to submit and create an account. Also, just your country and region. You can put your organization information in here as opposed to any personal, but that's up to you if you'd like to do that. So once you enter all this information in, make sure you have that verification code in here, or else it will tell you that you have not. You would then create, and also, again, the verified code needs to be submitted. Okay, so again, you have to have that verification code in. You verify the code, submit create all the information by populating the fields, and then create for your account. So once you have created the account, what you will see is if you go back to the home page, you'll then see up here it says My Account and Log Out, right? So you can then go to My Account, and it pulls up, here's my name, and it pulls up this sort of dashboard. And you see there's nothing listed here, and there shouldn't be if you're a new user, just because you haven't submitted a measure to us in the past. This here is the ability for you to filter through the stages of the review and submission process. So right now, since this is, it always defaults to this first step of intent to submit draft. But if you click on it, you can see the rest of the steps involved here. Some of these will be notifying Battelle that the intent to submit is complete and submitted. Some of these steps will be notifying you that it's ready for full measure submission draft, for example. So these steps in this process will be communications from us and to you about where things are after you've submitted your intent to submit, once that's approved, and then submitting the full measure submission. If there's any issues that need to be addressed, you'll be getting an email about that, and then you'll finalize the submission, and it goes on to the next phases, being published, etc. Okay. In addition, when you are back and not logged in to your account, you'll see a little login icon over here. If you're not logged in and you're coming to the page and you want to log in and submit a measure, there's a little login icon over here. I'll go back to showing you what that looks like. Here, right here. See? So if you're not logged in, you won't see that My Account and log out. You can easily just log in here or go to the Submit the Measure page and you can log in down here. Okay. Once you successfully logged in, you will then see the My Account and the log out, and the login tab will be gone. Okay. So let's submit a measure. So now we want to submit a measure, submitting a draft intent to submit, right? So you would just click Submit a Measure, and it will pull up the intent to submit form that you'll be filling out and submitting. Please keep in mind that you must complete all the required fields, and they're indicated as required in order for you to both save your work, but also to submit. Okay, you must complete the required fields in order to save your work. If you have not, the system will let you know at the very top here. It'll jump back up to the top and let you know what field needs to be populated if you missed it or did not fill it out. So when you go to this, you can then just select the cycle that you would like to submit to. Now we're talking about fall 2023, but you can see we have two other cycles available out here. We do offer intent to submit on somewhat of a rolling basis. Just keep in mind that you won't be able to actually move forward to full measure submission until we get to that timeline where we open that form up during that time. But we do have the other items here. And again, the intent to submit form is very high level and basic. But you would select for fall, you would select the fall 2023 cycle. You would then also want to select whether it's a new measure or whether it's a maintenance measure. And so if it's a new measure, you can continue to proceed. But if it's a maintenance measure, we kindly ask that you enter in your 4-digit CBE ID, which is formerly the NQF ID, right? So if it's a maintenance measure, please enter in your ID listed here. But we're just going to go with new. This will come back into play as well for the full measure submission, and I'll show you in a little bit. So newer maintenance, and then you just enter in your title. I'm just going to do FMS for full measure submission test, right? Please just enter in the actual title of your measure. Here's an example of what a title of a measure looks like. And then the measure description. So this is where you want to briefly describe that measure. You're not providing the rationale for the measure. You're just describing the measure. So what's the target population? What's your focus area of the measure? What's the time frame, if there's any time frames associated with it? This is not where you want to provide that rationale and all the evidence to support it. That comes in the full measure submission. Just what's your basic description of the measure? And I'm just going to put test. You can see that these fields also allow you to use some types of formatting. And this is all 508 compliant types of formatting, but you can bold certain things, italicize certain things. There's some bullet information you can list here as well. But again, this is just your measure description. You then can select the project. Now, if you're not familiar with the projects, you can click on the link here. Again, that is under that drop-down menu where it says endorsement and maintenance at the home page. If you click on projects, this takes you to the same page. So this is where you can just get a general description of the projects and the types of measures that will be evaluated for those projects. And there's only 5. Here are the 5. So the table within the E&M project committee page provides a high-level description of these projects, as well as some examples of measures that will be evaluated in these projects. And again, you can select that. Keep in mind that Battelle staff have full decision-making on the projects that the measure will be evaluated in. We make that decision-making by reviewing the measure, looking at the focus of the measure, looking at the expertise we have on our committees and the measure load of those committees, and we will move things around if needed. But we'll try to keep in mind what you have selected to move forward. But just letting you know that we still have it in our authority to change those measure the measured projects as needed for any given cycle. But keep in mind, though, that if you select cost and efficiency, we probably would be expecting you to have a cost or efficiency type of measure. So this is the kind of thing that we will be looking at once the intent to submit form is submitted. So if we see that you selected a cost and efficiency project, but the measure doesn't have anything to do with cost or resource use, we may reach out to you to confirm if you really intended the cost and efficiency cycle, or if the measure truly is the cost measure. You then will be asked if it is a composite. You can enter yes or no. And then you'll also be asked if it's an ECQM, or electronic clinical quality measure, in which you just answer yes or no. Again, we just want to know this for our planning purposes. We also ask that you submit your level of analysis. So is this going to be at a facility level? Is it at a accountable entity level? So you can select multiple. If you do select either other or population or geographic area, we kindly ask that you specify this further in these text fields below. I'm just going to do ACO. Also with the care setting. So you can select as many care settings that this measure is specified for. You can, so you can select multiple, right? And then there's also an other field as well. So if you do select, we do ask you to please specify the other care setting. So then just description of your numerator and your denominator. So again, that is where you adjust. I'm just going to put test here. That's where you are just going to enter in your information for your numerator and your denominator. Again, there's formatting you can use here if you so wish. This is, again, not where you want to enter in any rationale to support your measure. This is just a description of how what your target population and how that's defined, as well as your numerator. Okay, so after you submit that basic information, there'll be a series of checkboxes here, which are just attestations. The purpose of these is to indicate to you that what is expected by full measure submission. And it's just to make sure that you are aware of it and that you've attested that you will be able to have this information available. Okay, again, there's a link to the PQM evaluation rubric within the actual endorsement and maintenance guidebook. So what's listed here are some of the expectations that align with the PQM rubric, right? What will be used to evaluate measures. So we just want to bring this to your awareness and make sure that you're attesting that you will have this information ready. So there's just a series of checkboxes that say that you will have detailed measure specifications ready, right? As far as like how to calculate the measure, any data dictionaries or code sets, as well as a logic model to show that there is a business case for this measure, right? That this measure, if used and implemented, would actually close care gaps and improve outcomes, whether that's patient outcomes, whether that's costs, whether that's sort of resource types of outcomes. We just want to ensure that you have this logic model and, of course, evidence to support that. Impact and gap. So here's some designations here for initial endorsement, right? That you'll provide description of the measure's anticipated impact on certain outcomes. And for the maintenance piece, you'll supply actually performance gap information. So the measure at maintenance is anticipated to be used, right? Since it's been endorsed. So we actually want to see that there's gap closures that are happening here. So for maintenance endorsement, just keep in mind that we'll be wanting to see actually display of gap information. Then there's a feasibility assessment. So just a feasibility assessment methodology and results, excuse me. And if you will have an ECQM, you'll be expected to submit an ECQM feasibility scorecard, which is also linked within the E&M guidebook and also available within the forms as a link as well. So for measure testing, we also just want you to attest that did you do some testing for your measure, whether it be initial or maintenance. So you can select which ones that you decided to test, right? If you selected either one of them or both, or if you selected NA, right, you want to be able to specify why you did not conduct testing. So that could be because it's a maintenance measure and no testing is needed because the specifications have not changed. Or if you've had any issues with data availability, we want to just know what it is, what the issue is of why you did not move forward with testing. So we just want to select that. Okay, let me just put test here. So then there's this optional piece here. So it says address health equity. So if you've looked at the PQM evaluation rubric, starting with this new process, there is a domain of health equity. Now, through our public comment of that PQM rubric in the evaluation guidebook, we did learn that a lot of these measures aren't really designed to promote health equity. Some of them really aren't focused to do that. So we've moved this domain to optional. It is no longer a required domain, and it won't be required to evaluate the measure to determine endorsement or not, but it is an optional domain. And we highly encourage you to consider how your measure, whether it's designed to address health equity or not, could potentially address disparities in care. So it is optional, so you can leave it blank if you don't feel like you want to address that at all. Or if you want to, you can check it. That's fine. Again, it still would be optional for the full measure submission as well. Lastly is a measure's intended use, or not lastly, almost second to last here. Measure's intended use, just a description of the use or the intended use of the measure, as well as any unintended consequences associated with its use, especially when you're thinking about maintenance measures being out there in use. So you just want to attest that you'll have information for that. And then also, it's just asking you about risk adjustment. So if your measure is risk adjusted, you can indicate so by just saying, yes, it is risk adjusted. Or if it's stratified, you can also indicate that, yes, it is stratified. There'll be a series of questions that pop underneath it. If you say no, there's no questions. But if you say yes, it'll ask you for the conceptual model for your risk adjustment and also your risk adjustment approach. So just defining some description around that will be expected for full measure submission. If you use just stratification, we just want you to provide your stratification results and approach to that. So being clear and specifying that. And if you both risk adjust and stratify your measure, you'll have all three of those questions listed here. But again, if you're not, you can just say no. Lastly, again, we want to draw attention to the QMDSA form. Again, we have mentioned to try to get that started as you're creating your account, recognizing that we need to have this in order for us to move forward for public commenting of the measure and also just moving the measure for review. So drawing attention to that QMDSA form again, as well as the instructions. And again, if you're submitting multiple measures after your initial QMDSA form, you'll have additional measure form listed here. So just attesting to that. And then also 508. So since this is all going to be online, a lot of the text fields that we'll be showing you have some formatting capabilities. They will be 508 compliant formatting capabilities, but there'll also be ability for you to add attachments to certain aspects of the measure submission process. Those attachments could be supplemental data. They could be other types of information you'd like to provide for the committee to consider. We strongly ask that you ensure that you make that 508 compliant. There's some guidance within the E&M guidebook that gives you a checklist of how to ensure that your submission is 508 compliant. Again, strictly speaking about some of these attachments that you may be considering to submit along with your information. So please take a look at that E&M guidebook, take a look at the guidance checklist that's in there, and just ensure that your attachments are also 508 compliant. Lastly, it's just the measure contact information. So again, the individual that created the account and submitting the measure is already in the system, and you're not adding that information again. So if you do not want to add a secondary point of contact, and if you are the developer plus and also the steward organization, that's it. You don't need to check any of these boxes. But if you do have a secondary contact you'd like to add, you can definitely click that and all of this information pops up, right? So you can add that secondary contact information. And if you are a developer, but the steward is different, we also want to be able to know the steward contact information, which will be if you click that, it pops up and all of this information is displayed. And so just please enter in all that information accordingly, right? Let me go back down, click that off. Okay, so again, once you submit an intent to submit form, the individual who is submitting it will receive that email. So even if you're entering in the secondary contact, right now, the only person that would receive that email once something has been submitted or is up for your review after staff have reviewed it will be the person submitting it to begin with. So once you've done all of that and you've entered in all that information, you can save it as a draft. So you want to click which option you want to proceed with. You can either save it as a draft and come back to it, or you're ready to submit it completely. It's good to go and you'll hit submit. Now, again, if you save as a draft and you did not populate all the intended fields that are required, you'll be informed about what field you didn't populate at the very top of the page, right? It'll jump you back and it'll say that you need to address this field. But if everything looks good, you can just intend to submit, and then you would just hit save, and it would go be submitted to Patel. So once it's submitted, I'm just going to hop over here. Sorry, let me actually hit save. Sorry about that. So you can see here. So I just wanted to show you how it pops up here. So this is where it says measure type field is required. So I did not enter a measure type correctly. Here we go. See, so I have to enter that in, and then I can go down and then do the submit again. It's going in. Okay, so here's what it looks like on the back end. So here we have just some, just say unpublished, meaning it's not been published to the PQM website at all. And then you just have some information that you've submitted, right? So this is what you'll see once it's submitted on the back end. But if you'd like to then just go to your account, and you filter through, there's a series of test ones in here, but here's this FMS test that we just did down here, right? So right now it says intent to submit complete. That means if you completed it and if you submitted it to Patel. So that's why it's down here listed like that. Once Patel is done reviewing and making any comments on the intent to submit form, if everything looks good, you'll be moved to the full measure submission draft, right? And so you'll see the measure pop up under full measure submission draft where you can edit, and then you can start submitting for the full measure submission process. What that looks like, so let's, if we're pretending here that this is full measure submission draft, you'll get an edit and you would click edit and it opens up to this page, right? So what you'll see is, in addition to the intent to submit, which is this is sort of rolled up, it's collapsed at the moment, you'll then now have this full measure submission, all these different aspects for full measure submission listed here. You can change the intent to submit, right? You can actually edit some of the intent to submit information even after you've submitted it, right? So there is an ability for you to sort of tweak that if you want to. Again, this is just some basic information about the measure, but you are able to actually access that information and change it. See? Okay, but we're focusing on the full measure submission process now, right? So after staff have reviewed your intent to submit form, everything looks good. We will then move this to full measure submission draft. You will then get an email notifying you of such. You'll then be able to log back in, go to my account. If you filter to the full measure submission function, you'll then see the measure and you'll be able to edit it. And when you click edit, this is the page that opens. For full measure submission, please note that there are required fields as noted with this asterisk. And you may save your progress without completing all of those fields, but you will need to make sure that they are complete because we will catch it during the completeness check step, which is after full measure submission. And if we catch it, we'll have to have you go back in and make some edits or address the issues that we flagged for you. So as we go through, you want to enter the full measure specifications. So here's now where you start entering in some of the rationale information to support the measure, right? So enter in your rationale. You can see there's a text box here, very similar text box that we've seen previously with the formatting functions that you have available to you. If your measure specifications are available to the public on a website, we kindly ask for you to provide a URL for committee reviewers to access and also the public. If you have any data dictionary, code tables, etc., you can indicate here as such. If you do select no, it will ask you to do a test that all the other information around the specifics of the measure, if you have not uploaded code sets or have not uploaded a data dictionary, will be provided in the below submission fields. So if you're not have a data dictionary, you're attesting that all the information needed as far as the codes, etc., will be in the submission fields below. Okay. So then there's the numerator information. Now we want to get more about the numerator details. We want to actually know how you calculate the numerator. So we are listing that here. Again, there's a comment that says if your list of codes with descriptors is greater than a full page, or greater than be able to fill this text box, we do kindly ask that you do submit this as a CSV or Excel file. Again, part of this data dictionary piece up here. Same thing with the denominator. We kindly ask that you provide details on how to actually calculate the denominator, and you'll put that in here, and any denominator exclusions. So please provide those exclusions as well as how to calculate those exclusions. Be listed here. Then we want to move to the score. So the actual score itself. How do you classify that score? What type of score is it? Is it a composite score, counting score, rate of proportion, or some sort of other scoring method? As well as selecting the appropriate interpretation of that score. So what does a high score mean? Does that mean better quality or not? So you just be entering this information. And again, if you do an other or NA, it will ask you to please specify that further. Then we want to know how you actually calculate the score. So you can provide the text description here, or also provide a diagram as well and attach that file down here. So we want to know how you actually calculate that score when combining the numerator and denominator to actually get that score and removing any exclusions. If you do stratify the measure, we want to see your approach to that. You know, what are the specifications to stratify and how do you actually do that? So you list that here. If you're not stratifying at all, you can just put NA on here. But again, we will be looking to see if you've indicated stratification in your intent to submit and this isn't populated. This is part of this completeness review that we will do. So we just want to ensure that it's consistent with what we saw in intent to submit. So then we go down to the data source being used. Your measure may have multiple data sources. It may just have one data source, and there'll be another designation as well that does pop up if you do need to enter in or specify the other type of data source available. There will also be some information about patient-reported data and surveys if you do use a patient-reported type of survey instrument. And then we'll just kind of also get into that specific data source itself, sort of providing a little bit more of the name of the database or name of the registry you're actually using, just describing that data source further within this section, as well as any minimum sample size. So if you are specifying the measure at a certain sample, and we want to ensure that you are testing it with that sample, but we also need to know about that sample size as well. So this is where you would enter in that sample information. So if there's a minimum sample size, we'd want to know it. Then you move to importance. So here's again where you see this logic model, and you would attach a document to display the logic model and also explain it as well. Evidence to support the measure's importance. So this is where it gets into this business case, that there is some sort of a net benefit if this measure is used at either closing certain care gaps, which lead to beneficial outcomes or cost reductions. We want to see this type of evidence summary here. And please support this with evidence. So cite that evidence listed here. You'll see through the public commenting that we did or for the E&M guidebook, you'll see in the PQM rubric, there was a specification around seeing a systematic review. That is no longer going to be the case. We will just accept a literature review. It can include a systematic review, but it also can include various different other studies. And the purpose of this is to really try to be as inclusive as possible to really justify the business case for the measure. So a lot of those details will be explained in the E&M guidebook. And like I said, that new version will be posted at the beginning of October. We also want to know the anticipated impact. So if it's implemented, what is the impact? So again, citing the business case here, as well as existing healthcare quality landscape. Does the healthcare system currently have able to address this healthcare need that the measure is identified and trying to close gaps in? So just are there other measures out there in existence that are doing the same thing, or are there not? So we want to just have an explanation of the current landscape and want to know that you've actually taken a look at the landscape of measures, as well as any other initiatives that could potentially address this area of need. So then there's evidence of meaningfulness to the target population. Please keep this in mind. For any measure, whether it be a cost measure, whether it be an ECQM, anything even outside of a patient-reported outcome measure, we want to see that the patient population or the target population that is being used to calculate the measure really values whatever the measure is trying to capture, whether it's an outcome, process. So this can come from literature, or it could come from, if the developer or steward wants to do some initial type of patient engagement around this type of measure and the outcome that is being measured. So please pay attention to this. This will be in the PQM rubric, or it is in the PQM rubric. We want to see that the patients themselves, whoever's being used as the target population, finds the measure meaningful. Then going to the feasibility assessment. So just simple feasibility about the measure itself. How did any feasibility assessment inform any of the measure specifications? So just describing that there. Just asking if there's any proprietary information associated with the measure, and also any fees, licensing, or other requirements. Now, if you did select that this measure was an ECQM, you will be asked to also provide your feasibility scorecard. So if you did select that in your intent to submit, you'll have information listed in this feasibility asking you about the feasibility scorecard. Okay. Moving to scientific acceptability. So you have a description of the data that's been used for the measure, as well as the characteristics of those measured entities. So just providing some descriptive statistics about that, as well as descriptive statistics about the patient characteristics or the characteristics of the target population. So that'll be listed here. Then any differences in the data. If there's no differences in the data, if you're not using different data sources to calculate the measure, then you can indicate that here. But if there are differences in your data, or if there's like samples that are being used, we want you to be able to elaborate on that here, and how much the data or sample are different from each aspect of the testing. So please pay attention to that. If you haven't used different data sources, you can just clearly state that only one data source is being used, right? Then there's reliability and validity. So you have the different levels of analysis. Again, an NA, and you need to provide justification of why you did not provide any testing. And then you want to see the methods for your testing. And please don't just drop in a citation. We want to explain the method, that you're using for testing, and also providing your reliability testing results. So you'll provide those statistical results accordingly. If you do choose an unaccountable entity level testing, you will also be asked to provide the distribution of those scores for reliability. And so you'll be asked to populate that information as well. And then we just want you to interpret your results. So what it is that you think, how do your results support this inference that the measure is reliable? All right, so that is for validity, or excuse me, reliability. Moving to validity, same setup. You'll be asked if it's accountable entity level, or you didn't do any testing, or if it's patient encounter level. And we also want to know the method of validity testing, as well as your interpretation of the results and the validity results themselves. There is this call out for the risk adjustment section as well, where you then enter in whether or not the risk adjustment is, you have a risk adjustment model, there's no risk adjustment, et cetera. And again, there you can see that a conceptual model will be required, as well as descriptive statistics around any of the risk variables that you're going to be using for the risk model, as well as the risk model specifications, your risk factor statistical results, and then also your calibration and discrimination statistics for the performance of that risk model itself. So all that information available there. And that will get you through all the scientific acceptability sections. I mentioned equity is an optional domain, so it is going to be optional. So you would then enter in any description you have about how this measure can advance health equity or reduce disparities. Again, if you feel like this information isn't necessarily relevant for your measure, you can indicate that as such, since it is optional. But we really are encouraging you to try to provide this information as we want to be able to start seeing this information come through and collecting this, which again could reshape our evaluation criteria. Lastly is use and usability. So with use, we want to know, are there any current or planned uses with this measure? Now this measure we indicated is a new measure. If you did select this measure as a maintenance measure, I'll just go back and intend to submit really quickly. You will have the specifying the planned use, or the current use, excuse me, and what it is. So it just changes your options. So now you can see for you to actually describe the program. So what the name of the program is, what the URL is. So now we're asking you to describe the program, and you can continue to add programs. So if it's used in one or more programs, you can add information about that. And that's really for the maintenance measure itself. So the new measure is not going to be asking about all these programs because we anticipate it's a new measure, but you can at least specify if it is used and what type of program. It's just not going to be this level of information. We do expect this for maintenance measures. Going to usability, you also have differences in what's expected between new and maintenance measures. So right now we're on maintenance. So actions of the measured entities to improve the performance. So we want to know what type of actions these measured entities can do to improve the performance on this measure. This can come through feedback loops that you may have with those being held accountable to the measure. It could come from evidence or other things that you may want to provide in here. There's also a feedback loop piece here about summarizing any feedback you received on the measure since it's been used, right? This is a maintenance measure. The expectation would be it's used. So providing that feedback here and how it was obtained, and how did that feedback actually change the measure? Did it actually result in any changes? Why or why not? And then there's this progress on improvement. So this is, again, for maintenance measures, we want to see, has there been any change over time? Not just even overall, but also with various different subpopulations, right? So we want to be able to see that there's changes over time after the measure is being used, and if that measure is used resulted in any unexpected findings. So you would enter that information here. I'll just show you what this looks like for the new measure. We clicked on new, and we go back down. So you can see under usability, all that information disappears because it's a new measure. It most likely would not be used, so we would expect to see not a lot of improvement information. But we do want to see if there's anything that you have that can discuss improvement or talk about improvement. So once that's all said and done, again, you can save it as a draft, and you can come back to it later. Again, keeping the deadline in mind, right? For the full measure submission, that's November 1st of this year. So once you're comfortable with all of the submission, you would then hit full measure submission and then hit save. And what happens there is that the Battelle staff will be notified that the measure has been submitted. We will then conduct our completeness review. When we do that, we're looking to see if all of the relevant fields are populated. We want to see that they're populated with the information that's being expected for that given field. If we do find that there needs to be some attention or something needs to be edited or changed to better meet what is expected or address the actual item, we will flag that in the system, and the individual that submitted the measure will get an email notifying them that there has been an issue identified through the completeness review. You will have no less than 48 business hours to address any of that feedback. Now, if you submit things sooner, you have a little bit more time, but you'll have no less than 48 hours. And the email that will be sent to the individual that submitted the full measure submission form will provide that clear deadline, as well as the date that we would expect to have these issues addressed. Once we've reviewed whatever issues that have been addressed, we will then move this measure over to publishing for public comment. So that will be where all the measure specifications move to public comment. It'll be open for 30 days. In the same time period, concurrently with that public comment period, the Battelle staff will then start drafting our staff preliminary assessments. So this was formerly your preliminary analysis that the prior CBE used to provide, right? Those preliminary analyses or PAs. This is very similar to that. It will be within this system. So there won't be any PDFs that are sent to you or Word versions that are sent to you. It will actually be all in the system. And similarly, we will be asking you to review the staff assessments for factual review. A factual review is just to ensure that we have articulated or represented your testing results or the number of studies you've reviewed, for example, accurately. This factual review is not intended to really argue the ratings assigned to the domains, right? Just like the preliminary analyses, we rated each one of these domains, which we walked through just now. These are very preliminary, and it's really not up to staff to assign that or confirm that rating. It really is going to be the committee members themselves that will be reviewing that. using the preliminary assessments as a basis for discussion and consideration, but ultimately they're the ones that will assign the endorsement rating. So again, the staff preliminary rating is just preliminary. It's used to just provide some initial review and discussion for the committees. And the factual review that will be asked of developers and stewards for the staff preliminary analysis is really just that, a factual review. So if you send comments to us arguing a lot of the rating decisions, if we do not fully address all of those comments, just keep in mind it's also due because we are really focusing on a factual review of the measure. But developers will have an opportunity to review those staff assessments. And in addition, once that is all done, we'll confirm the staff assessments complete. It will then be sent to our committee members. They'll get an email notifying them that the measures are ready for their independent reviews. So they're doing it independently first. And once all that information is done, we will then share all of that with you, the developer and stewards, to review not only the public comments, but also the staff assessments and the committee independent reviews in advance of the endorsement meeting. And again, from the timeline for the fall 2023 cycle, the endorsement meetings will happen in February, actually the beginning of February next year. So that is a walkthrough of the intent to submit and full measure submission process and forms. I think now we'll just go back to our slide deck and we'll open it up for question and answers as well. And I'll turn it back to Brenna to start triaging some of those.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. We have gotten quite a few questions, about 30 so far. They're still coming in. So I'm going to try to group a few of them because there's some common themes. One big area is that folks are wondering whether it makes sense for them to have individual accounts or one account per organization. And there's some follow-on questions related to, for example, if one person from an organization submits the measure, will others be able to see any changes that are made? And will other staff at their organization be notified of upcoming deadlines and such? So if you could just talk a little bit about how the account management will work.
Yeah, that's great. Great questions. So yes, we highly encourage that anyone that would be touching measure submissions or working through this process, please do make an account, but please designate an individual within your organization that will be submitting for this cycle. We will, in future stages of this, we will be considering how we can start to link accounts based on the organization. So that way, for those purposes of logging in and seeing where measure statuses are, that functionality is what we'll be considering and rolling out in future stages. But for fall 2023, yes, please make an account, especially if you're a part of that organization and you will be working with the submission process and endorsement process. But for the fall 2023 cycle, please designate this one person from your organization that will be doing submitting and also receiving those emails. Like I mentioned, in future stages of this, we will be linking all of these accounts to an organization, and then that way you'll be able to start to have access to these types of emails, et cetera. So that'll be future stages of the process. But for fall 2023, one person, and yes, we do encourage multiple people in the organization to make those accounts. And again, mapping to that single organization, like I said, for future rollout of updates.
Thanks, Matt. Related to that, someone asked if there would be any issues with an organization using like a shared email address, similar to like our PQM account, to create their account.
There's no issue in using a shared email. Obviously, the email that you will receive as far as your verification code will go to that email. Any information about the measure submission stages, like I mentioned, if staff are reviewing and we find an issue that needs to be addressed, whether that be for intent to submit a full measure submission, just keep in mind that it'll go to that email. So if you have someone that's monitoring that or a few people, you can still use that shared email account to make your account.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. Okay. There are also a lot of different questions about maintenance, but before we jump into that, one person asks if you were to complete an intent to submit for October, but then you realize that you need more data for the full submission and don't end up submitting your full measure by November, are you going to have to submit an entirely new intent to submit in May? or April, or can the original ITS just roll over to the next cycle?
Yeah, it's a great question. We will have, if you've actually submitted the data for intent to submit, we will have that. So we will be able to work with you on providing that information to you, but also if it's in the system. So if you've indicated that you want to submit for fall 2023, and that's good and accepted, we have the ability to shift that back to the draft version if need be. So it'll be within your dashboard. So sort of a long answer to say, yeah, yes, there will be some functionality that we can do to work with a developer. If they come down to full measure submission deadline, they unfortunately are not able to provide updated testing data. We can, the information that you've entered for intent to submit will be saved, and we can work with you on moving the status back to the intent to submit draft for a given cycle.
Perfect, thank you. I'll take this next one, but Matt, chime in if there's anything you want to add. So one person brought up the conversion from NQF measures to PQM is a little bit hard to understand, and they want to understand when is it that everybody will know what the new measures are. And so I guess what I'll start by saying is that we're not actually changing any specifications to measures that were previously submitted to NQF for endorsement and maintenance review. We have those measures in our database so that the historical information is all there. The only difference is that instead of giving them an NQF ID, we're just calling them CBE ID. So the ID number is just different, but the measures themselves haven't changed. So there's no conversion other than that difference in ID number. So when it comes to looking at the measures that are in the database, if you are familiar with a former ID number that was under NQF, you can still search that way in our database. But Matt, anything you'd add there?
Yeah, exactly. So that if you go to the homepage, the very top tabs, if you go past E&M to the right, you'll see the measures, a link for, or a menu item for measures. That's where you'll have a searchable database. So if you're familiar with the quality positioning system that NQF had, it's very similar type of information that would be displayed. Now, keep in mind that we are still doing a lot of the data conversion to our system. So all the data that's out there right now is data that we've had from NQF, from their QPS system. As we move through the end of this year and going into next year, there's going to be a lot of updating to those data. Updating in the sense of measures that are going through right now for endorsement and fall 2023, all of that information will obviously be updated. Especially as measures start coming through, you'll start to see links to where there is accessible measure specifications available in that searchable database. And then additionally, what I wanted to mention is if you are a maintenance measure developer and you log in to create an account, when you log into your dashboard, you're not going to see a list of all of your maintenance measures, right? Because you're now first starting to submit measures to Battelle. If you do request the data from from what was MIMS, the Measure Information System at NQF, please reach out to us at pqmsupport@battelle.org. So we can try to find or pull the data from your measure and provide that to you. But please just reach out to pqmsupport@battelle.org. Again, as a maintenance measure developer, you're creating an account, you log in, you're not going to see all of your maintenance measures. So if you're looking to submit for the fall 2023 cycle or a future cycle, please reach out to us and we can pull from the data we have for you.
Thanks, Matt. A couple of people had some QMDSA questions. Specifically, how do those work for measures that are developed by a contractor and stewarded by CMS?
Yeah, so any of the CMS stewarded or entities that are government agencies that are also stewarding measures. So this is not a developer, this is actual stewards of the measures. So if they're CMS or any government entity, you'll see in the instructions for QMDSA that it's not required. So if it's a CDC measure, if it's a CMS measure, so if it's a government entity, the QMDSA is not required. But please pay attention to the instructions within that QMDSA instruction link.
All right, stepping back to some of the questions about the submission, I missed this sub-question earlier, but this person wants to understand, does the person who actually submits the full measure have to be the same as the person who submitted the ITS?
Yes, it will be the same person, just because that measure is tracked to that account. So again, for this first cycle, this is what we will be rolling out with. In future stages, like I mentioned, we'll be mapping the accounts to organizations so that multiple users can be logging in. But for the fall 2023 cycle, the person who submits the intent to submit is going to be the same person for full measure submission, because that measure is linked to that individual's account.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I want to turn to maintenance reviews because a lot of people are wondering when developers can expect to hear about the maintenance schedule for their measures if they haven't already. And some folks are specifically interested in whether there's going to be a maintenance schedule for measures that are overdue for review given the NQF delays during COVID.
Great questions. All of them are due next year. No, I'm just kidding. If you are a fall 2023 or if you're a developer steward of fall 2023 maintenance measures, you should have received an email from us several weeks ago, just letting you know that we've been doing some moving with your measures as far as cycle assignments. Some of them we've kept within fall 2023 because of the date of last endorsement, from where we are now to the date of last endorsement being lengthy. Some we've proposed reassigning to future measures. So this reassignment work that we are doing right now with those fall 2023 developers of maintenance measures does not impact any sort of deferral policy for you. So this is all internal, that we are making these decisions and reaching out to you about that. So please, if you did not receive that email or someone else in your organization did not receive that email and you have a maintenance measure up for fall 2023 endorsement, please reach out to us at pqmsupport@battelle.org. If you did receive that email, you'll have until next Friday, September 22nd, after seeing this webinar and actually going into the system, to reach out to us to confirm whether you want confirm the cycle reassignment or you'd rather have it moved somewhere else. We want to be able to work with you and be as flexible as possible. That's fall 2023. We do recognize that there are other measures outside of fall 2023, and we will be sending out similar types of communications about measure cycle assignments for those maintenance measures in the coming months before the end of the year, so that you know when your measure is going to be due. So please keep that in mind. And then if you are curious about some of the processes with maintenance periods, as well as annual updates and off-cycle reviews, all of that will be included in the E&M guidebook. So again, the updated version of that will be available at the beginning of October of this year. So please pay attention to what's listed in there. But we will be reaching out to all developers of maintenance measures that we have and stewards of not just fall 2023, but in the next coming months, just confirming cycle assignments with you. And that can mean having your measure moved to a later cycle. We won't be moving measures earlier unless you want that to be the case. So for example, we've actually sent out communications to some developers saying, can you move from fall 2023 to fall 2025? And they actually wanted to come back in fall 2024 or remain in fall 2023. So we won't make any move earlier. Our reassignments will be pushed further out. We'll be working with developers and stewards to confirm if that reassignment works or they want to bring it back sooner.
And that's a couple more maintenance related questions. Some folks are wondering whether the submission process is the same for maintenance measures and whether any information will be carried over or pre-filled from the old system.
Another great question. So there are differences in certain items. I showed you some of them, largely with the use and usability component with maintenance versus new measures. There's a few other nuances. You'll see in the Word version and the Word versions of these forms, you'll see that called out for any given item. It says for initial endorsement or for maintenance endorsement. If that designation of for initial endorsement or for maintenance endorsement is not indicated for a given item, it'll be asked regardless of whether it's a maintenance or a new measure, right? So that's all indicated in the Word forms, and as you click through some of the submission items, especially if indicated new or maintenance, those questions will appear and the maintenance questions will not if it's a new measure, and vice versa. The second piece of that question, Brenna, I can't remember what it was now. Yeah, if you recall.
It was whether or not any information will be carried over from or pre-filled from the old system.
Yeah, again, great question. So again, we are still finalizing and cleaning up a lot of the data conversion to our systems from NQF, and that includes MIMS, the Measure Information Management System. So if you've indicated that your measures maintenance in this submission process, it won't be populated. Also, because a lot of the questions are a little bit different. Now they're still getting to the same type of expectation, but we've consolidated a lot of things and a lot of questions. So it won't be a clear mapping. But if you still need that information for you to be able to submit for this fall, please reach out to pqmsupport@battelle.org. So we can, please provide your measure ID and measure title, and that you're interested in submitting for fall, and we want us to see if we can pull information from the files we have from NQF. So we can share that with you. So it's not going to be a complete population of information in the form, but at least you'll have the information to pull from to populate the fields within our process.
This may be a question for our web team and software development team, but I'll put it to you, Matt, first. If folks copy paste from a template into the PQM portal, will the formatting from that copy paste be preserved in those free text fields?
Now, that is a good question. I could try to answer, but I probably would need to have either Maureen or Joe address that question. So Maureen or Joe, who are on our development team, if you heard the question, it's if they've done some formatting in text on a Word version and they copy paste it and put it into our text fields in the form, will that formatting be maintained, or will they have to redo it? And I don't know if Maureen or Joe.
I was searching for my mute button. I believe currently that will be preserved, and if not, we can update that text editor to preserve it. And maybe that you have to click a button in the text editor and paste into a dialog box first, and then say put this into the form as a step. But we can certainly QA that and make sure that is part of the functionality.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah. Okay, Matt, another maintenance question. Is it possible that the project category, so the project that a measure is assigned to, will change when the measure comes up for maintenance? So is it possible that a measure might be reviewed initially by one committee and then reviewed by a different committee under maintenance?
It could be possible. And it could be either because the committees themselves have changed, which as we continue to roll out and learn through our rollout of the process and over time, maybe committees may change, either the names of the committees or even an additional committee potentially, who knows? But also the measure itself, depending on the focus area of the measure or how things might have been updated or the expertise we have on certain committees, again, Battelle staff have that discretion to, or have that ability and authority to move those measures, even if you've identified a particular project or committee you want it to be evaluated in. We will make sure that there's expertise available on a committee if it is being moved to another committee, but there is the possibility that a project may change, or the measure that was originally evaluated by one committee may be evaluated by a different committee for maintenance. It just depends on a series of factors.
For measures that were previously endorsed for trial use, do we have a specific process for how developers should submit them for full endorsement? Is it different than the ordinary maintenance process? Anything you can share there?
Yep, great question. So you'll just be submitting like a full measure. So if your measure is out there at trial use currently and it's coming up for maintenance endorsement, you would just submit through this process we just walked through. Intent to submit, as well as full measure submission as well. Now, as far as any measures that have trial use designations that have happened recently, they'll be falling into a maintenance cycle. When I say recently, we did have a trial use measure go through for our fall 2022 cycle, which is the cycle that originally kicked off at NQF. So that there is one measure under that cycle that went into trial use. So that will go into a maintenance cycle And the next time that measure comes back through, it'll populate all the required fields in the forms that we've walked through, and will be evaluated under the current process.
Thanks, Matt. All right, I'll try to take a stab at this question and then chime in if you, but otherwise take the break if you need it, Matt. So folks have been wondering if the projects for the fall cycle have been announced yet. And what I'll say is that unlike in past years where only certain committees were convened each cycle based on the measures that came through, because we only have the 5 different committees, the likelihood is that all 5 will be convened this cycle. We will be able to announce that formally after the intent to submit deadline passes so that we can just ensure that we have measures for each of those committees to review. But in general, it'll be likely the same 5 every year. But Matt, anything to add there?
No, that is it. So yeah, it could be up to 5. So it could be less than that, but at most, at least for this fall 2023 and going into spring 2024, right, those are the 5 projects that we would be convening up to that number.
Yep. Okay. One person is just asking for a little bit of clarification on something that you talked about during your demo, Matt. They were wondering what the if the measure specifications don't change at all on maintenance measures, does that mean that additional testing won't need to be submitted?
So great question. If nothing has changed with the measure, you can indicate that within those required fields. So especially the initial attestations for intent to submit, if you indicate not applicable, we would want you to provide that explanation rationale of why you're not updating the test because the specifications haven't changed, right? In addition, we would expect to see that for full measure submission. We will take in consideration if that is true in our review of the staff assessments as well as the committee review, but that would be a rationale that we would be looking for if you've indicated that testing is not applicable because the measure specifications have not been updated. So please just indicate that in those required fields.
Okay. Let's see, this is a good question. And again, it might be another one for you, Joe. But for the editable ITS fields, once the measure's been moved into the full measure submission form, is one of those modifiable fields measure title? So in other words, will developers or stewards be able to change the name of the measure in the full submission if it's been posted a different way in the ITS?
Yeah, I can take that one, Joe. Oh, sorry, Joe, are you going to chime in?
The answer was yes. They could go back into the ITS section and change it. But you go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, so the answer is yes, like Joe mentioned. So when I was screen sharing the full measure submission form, I also showed you can uncollapse or expand would be the right term, the intent to submit form that you submitted previously, and you can change the title form. Now, we'll be paying attention to what you're changing because we want to make sure that it's still the same measure that you intended to submit. So we will be reviewing that once the full measure submission is fully submitted. We want to make sure that whatever you're changing isn't really changing the overall intent of the measure and the specifications, but you will be able to make those modifications.
Okay. Folks want to know how or if and how they can upload an Excel sheet.
Yep. So in the forms where you're able to upload for, let's say, your data dictionary or your code sets or your ECQM feasibility scorecard, there will be areas where you can actually select and choose a file and upload it. And it could be an Excel file, it could be a PDF, and it'll actually specify underneath the choose a file or select a file button, what types of files will be accepted for that. So you will be able to upload those types of information in those types of fields, and it could be an Excel file as well.
Okay, I'm going to take a stab at this next one, but I definitely want you to chime in here, Matt. One person commented that the submission fields that you walked through seem very similar as CMS's JIRA and NQF's previous submission form, and they want to kind of understand what's new and different about ours. So the first thing they'll add is just a little context. So like the CMS JIRA form, which has been in a couple years ago switched over to the Merit system. That's the system that's used for measures to be submitted for the pre-rulemaking process to be used in CMS programs. And then obviously NQF's previous submission system was for the same purposes as this one. So the common fields that you're going to see are those that you would expect, right? Like we're looking for measure title, all of the measure characteristics and data sources. So all of those are common fields. What you're going to see that's a little bit different, I mean, first of all, it's meant to look similar to the previous NQF submission form because it's serving the same purpose. It's just under sort of new ownership, but a lot of the changes that you're going to see are in the way that we're asking for the measure developers to speak to things like validity and reliability. So it's not that we're asking for something different. The criteria haven't changed, but the way that those fields have been consolidated and sort of what we're looking for in terms of telling the story of the measure is a little bit different than how it's been done in the past. Anything you'd add there, Matt?
No, I think that's it. Right on, Brenna. I think just that consolidation of some of those items, and as you'll see, even in the Word version as you go through, you can, if you've submitted things to NQF in the past, you can see there's just more consolidation of some of the content. And also, if you're a developer of cost measures, it's just one form. So if you're a developer of cost or composite measures, you have this one form. There may be some things that are different items that pop up depending on if you selected it's a cost measure, but it's all in one form. So there are just some of those differences, but the content and what we're asking for of developers is going to be very similar to what NQF did. Really just trying to explain that story, like Brenna mentioned.
Matt, are ECQMs that obtained approval for trial use from NQF considered fully endorsed by PQM? Or do
No.
they just contain their prior? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Brenna, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay.
So those measures that are currently approved for trial use are just that. They are approved for trial use and they have a maintenance cycle. And again, like I mentioned earlier, we will be expecting when that maintenance cycle is up, that the full measure details and testing be submitted to PQM for endorsement or submitted to Battelle for PQM endorsement review. In addition to that, like I also mentioned earlier, is even though that your measure may be out there for trial use for maybe up for endorsement the next year, we will be reaching out to you to see if there's any cycle assignments or reassignments that need to be done. So like I mentioned, we'll be sending that communication out to all of those developers with maintenance measures and trial use measures that are not part of fall 2023 right now. We'll be sending out communications to all those other measure developers and stewards in the coming months. And just to confirm the cycle assignment, whether it's going to be the same cycle it originally was had a maintenance period for, or it's a future cycle. And that can include those trial use measures as well.
Thanks, Matt. This is another one that I'll take, but I'll turn it to you, Matt, after. So one person is asking, what influence does PQM review have on endorsement by CMS? So if PQM endorses a measure, will CMS automatically endorse it also? And what I'll say is that CMS doesn't have a process for endorsing its own measures. So PQM is doing the job that NQF did previously, which is that we are serving in a sort of a third-party capacity to review measures for endorsement, and that includes CMS measures. So if a measure is PQM endorsed, or we would say CBE endorsed, then it is, that's the designation that it has, and CMS does acknowledge that endorsement ruling. If you were asking whether a measure being endorsed impacts whether or not CMS will use the measure in a program, I would say having an endorsed status helps when a measure is sent through the rulemaking process, the pre-rulemaking and rulemaking processes, to be used in a CMS program, but they are separate processes. So endorsement does not guarantee that a measure will be used in a CMS program. Anything you'd add there, Matt?
No, I think it was great. Thanks, Brenna.
Sure. Some folks are wondering, how do you defer a maintenance measure to another cycle? So we've talked about from our end, how we're managing that process, but if a measure developer knows that they want to defer, how would they go about bringing that to us.
Yeah, please email us at pqmsupport@battelle.org. We definitely will review your deferment request to a future cycle. Again, we've already done some cycle reassignments internally. We just haven't shared all of those out to developers and stewards right now. We've only been doing it for fall 2023 just to get those maintenance measure developers ready to go for fall 2023. But thereafter, before the end of the year, we will be sending out similar emails to other measure developers. Within those emails, there may be that your measure may already be moved or reassigned. That, again, does not impact, none of this reassignment type of work that we're doing right now for your measures does not impact any sort of deferral policy right now, because this is all staff driven. So we will be sending out those emails, but if you still would like to share your request, deferral request, you can email us at pqmsupport@battelle.org. We will get back to you to see, and most likely we'll respond to you to see if there, what cycle we originally were thinking of bringing your measure through, but we will work with you accordingly. But you can either hold off until those emails come out later this year, or you can reach out to us at pqmsupport@battelle.org.
Thanks. All right, we have been continuing to receive questions as we've been going through this Q&A, which I'm so appreciative of. This is incredible engagement. We have almost 50 questions to get through. I'm going to ask one more here, but I want to reassure everyone that we will follow up in writing on questions that we didn't get to today. So whether that's individually by email, if it's a very specific question, or if it's in a larger sort of like FAQ document that we pull together and post on the website, we will try to do our best to respond to everything that we heard today. But the last one before we roll towards adjournment here, Matt, is can you just talk about whether or not reserve status is still going to be a thing under our new process, and what will happen to existing reserve status measures?
Yeah, great question as well. So if you look in our E&M guidebook, reserve status is not an endorsement category. It's not a category that measures are in under this new process. So that being said, is reserve status at the current moment, especially rolling out for this new process, will not be a category or decision that can be made on a measure. So reserve status, for those of you that may not be familiar with it, it was an NQF designation of a measure if it was topped out, quotation marks there. Topped out meaning that the gap, there is no more gap. There's no more performance gap or care gap that needs to be filled. So NQF would, and the standing committees that would convene would designate those measures sometimes as endorsed with or reserved with inactive endorsement, technically is what it was called. For our process, that is not a category. For those measures that are currently within that reserved with an active endorsement status, we will be reaching out in the coming months with those developers accordingly to determine what we will want to do with those measures, potentially maybe bring them back through or something else. So it's nothing is finalized at this moment, but we will be reaching out to those developers for those reserve status measures currently in the coming months, similar to like what we're doing right now with reaching out about the maintenance cycles and reassignments. But keep in mind that if your measure is coming through as a maintenance measure, we will not have a reserve status designation. So the only categories we have are the measure is either endorsed, it has endorsed with conditions. And again, the E&M guidebook, as the newer version that will be released in the beginning of October, will state what some of those conditions could be, as well as endorsement removed or not endorsed. So those are the categories that we have for this process.
Thanks, Matt. All right, we can go to the next slide. So this is just to wrap us out. We have a couple things, a couple announcements on the next slide before you before you leave. But you can become a PQM member, as Matt said, by going to the PQM website and going to our Get Involved page. Memberships are free. They're available at both the individual and organizational level, and becoming a member means that you don't miss out on any announcements for webinars like these, as well as opportunities for measure submissions, public comment, and so on. Go to the next slide, please. We have a couple of engagement opportunities coming up. We're going to be talking through the endorsement and maintenance evaluation rubric, which will be huge if you're a measure developer or a measure steward interested in understanding how these evaluations are going to look. And then there are a couple of upcoming public comment opportunities listed here, specifically to review the spring 2023 measure evaluations. So we're wrapping up that process from the prior cycle. So the post-comment meetings will be in October, and then the CSAC, that'll be the last time that they're convening for this process, and that'll be in early December on the 6th and 7th of this year. The fall 2023 E&M rosters are up right now, right, Matt, for public comment?
They will be by the end of this month.
Thank you. By the end of the month, the E&M rosters will be available for public comment, and then the fall 2023 measures will be up in December.
Yeah, I'll just add briefly quick. So this December 5th meeting, again, it's a review of the evaluation rubric. It also will be a review of the roles and responsibilities of these committee members. So our E&M committees will be on that call as part of like an orientation in which we will talk about the roles and responsibilities for them, sort of what to expect during these endorsement meetings, as well as the evaluation rubric. So that will be a good one for all stakeholders and interested parties to attend on December 5th. And that will also be recorded. The recording will be posted roughly about a week or so after the meeting. Thanks, Brenda.
All right, I think we have one final slide. Yep. So again, just thank you everybody for your time and attention today. We really appreciate your engagement in this process. And as I said, we will respond in writing to any questions that we didn't get to during the call. So have a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.